Everyone needs time alone sometimes, and quiet solitude can help lower stress. But being alone takes on a very different meaning when it slowly happens, or is forced on you. When that happens, the effects can spread much farther than you may expect. And even though different people feel different effects at different times, symptoms usually become more severe and lasting the longer a person is isolated. When someone is forced to stay in one place for an unknown amount of time, for days, weeks, months, or even years, alone and without useful tasks, their body will likely go through many changes. Let's take a look at what may happen and why. At first, stress hormones may rise, and over time, that stress can become chronic. Social interaction and meaningful activities are important for emotional stability. This may be because they give us what researchers call social reality testing, a kind of sounding board where we can tell how reasonable our perceptions are. So, when someone is cut off from those kinds of communication and tasks, their sense of identity and reality starts to feel threatened. Their thoughts begin to spiral, and their impulses take control, setting the stage for depression, obsessions, suicidal thoughts, and, for some, delusions and hallucinations. Over time, this long-lasting distress can make the brain's limbic system, which controls fear and stress, become especially sensitive and overactive. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for reasoning and moral judgment, may shrink, hurting one's focus, memory, and thinking. Overall, the balance shifts away from rational thinking and toward emotion, and as someone stays in this state, the imbalance becomes more deeply set, making them more likely to have periods of anxiety, rage, and irrational actions. Isolation will also affect other parts of the person's health. They may lose their sense of time and have trouble sleeping. They're more likely to experience heart palpitations, headaches, dizziness, and hypersensitivity. And they may also lose weight because of stress-related digestive problems and poor appetite. A person can try to cope by building the healthiest routine possible under these extreme conditions, including strong exercise, reading, and writing. But that can only help so much. The United Nations, many human rights groups, and experts classify this kind of forced long-term isolation as torture. And yet, it's something imprisoned people in many countries go through. Also called solitary confinement or restrictive housing, the practice is most common in the United States. In 2019, more than 120,000 U.S. prisoners lived in solitary confinement, spending 22 to 24 hours a day in mostly windowless cells about 6 by 9 feet. Quaker groups introduced solitary confinement to U.S. prisons in the late 1700s as an alternative to physical punishment, believing it could bring about reflection and penitence, hence penitentiary. But the practice quickly faced criticism, from public figures all the way to the Supreme Court. Charles Dickens, for example, condemned solitary confinement as worse than any torture of the body. Its use decreased, but then, in the 1980s, along with harsher, tough-on-crime laws, U.S. prison populations shot up. As prisons became crowded, cases of protests, rebellions, and violence grew, and prison authorities increasingly used solitary confinement to keep control. Many people have been put in solitary confinement for minor, nonviolent rule-breaking, like talking back to prison guards. And solitary confinement is harmful to everyone, but many people who've gone through it have pre-existing mental health disorders, which it only makes worse. Solitary confinement also seems to have lasting effects that make adjusting to life outside of a cell difficult. People who have been through solitary confinement are 3 times more likely to show signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And they commonly report having changes in their personalities, increased anxiety and paranoia in otherwise normal situations, and trouble concentrating and connecting with others. Some states have restricted the use of solitary confinement in cases involving serious mental illness, children, or pregnancy, and some have adopted 15 or 20-day limits for everyone. But laws that regulate solitary confinement aren't always enforced, and prison authorities have created loopholes. Yet solitary confinement causes huge damage that goes against rehabilitation, while failing to reduce prison violence. Meanwhile, other countries have focused on more humane approaches. Norway, for example, imprisons far fewer people per person than the U.S., while spending 5 times more per prisoner on housing, classes, and work release programs. Norway also sees far fewer people return to prison after release, with one of the world's lowest rates of recidivism, showing that we usually do better together.